The calendar reads June 30th. For thousands of migrants living across South Africa, both undocumented and documented alike, this date has evolved into a highly consequential moment. Across various communities, grassroots mobilizations, localized civilian initiatives, and citizen-led community groups have rallied around this specific deadline, calling for decisive shift in how migration is handled in the country. Governments from across the African continent, including Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Malawi, and Mozambique, have stepped in, with some orchestrating large-scale repatriations of the citizens from South African soil. So why is South Africa again on the spotlight with this issue? If history serves truth, is it truly the only African nation to grapple with deep-seated institutional and social hostility towards foreign nationals? To understand what is truly happening beneath these escalating headlines, it is necessary to look past modern political rhetoric and anchor the discussion in a foundational definition. As described by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, xenophobia is the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners. It functions as a psychological and cultural barrier, separating the familiar from the unfamiliar. But is what you're witnessing Afrophobia? This more specific term has steadily entered the continental lexicon to describe a highly localized variation of bias. Critics frequently point out that this type of hostility rarely extends to non-African populations residing on the continent, such as Europeans or Asians, even when those groups face similar documentation gaps. According to continental tracking data, over 21 million Africans live in another African country outside of the country of origin, while approximately 19 million African-born migrants live outside the continent entirely. Millions of citizens move intra-regionally, driven by economic opportunities, regional trade corridors, and the search for safety. When broken down per region, clear corridors emerge. West Africa and Southern Africa stand out as the most heavily utilized migration zones on the continent. In terms of sheer volume, Egypt holds the highest number of emigrants in Africa, with 4.9 million of its citizens living abroad, primarily moving towards Western Asia and neighboring North African states. When it comes to receiving communities, South Africa stands as one of the primary destinations for economic migrants. While historical migration corridors drew populations from immediate neighbors like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and so on, modern settlement patterns have expanded to bring communities from thousands of kilometers away. Xenophobia in South Africa traces back deeply into the late 20th century, heavily shaped by the structural transitions of the 1990s and the painful isolation of the apartheid era. Inside the townships, early blueprints for structural division took root, followed by a dual layer of friction where farm populations faced a complex mix of structural exploitation and growing suspicion from local communities. This historic undercurrent exploded into global consciousness in 2008. Deadly waves of targeted violence tore through major townships, resulting in over 60 fatalities, thousands of injuries, and the mass displacement of tens of thousands of foreign nationals. When modern migration corridors expanded, drawing populations from afar or even nearby, permanent settlement patterns became more prominent and the socioeconomic friction evolved. When local citizens and foreign nationals find themselves competing directly over commercial space and revenues in saturated local markets, the structural strain turns historical labor integration into an intense, localized struggle for daily survival. When stepping across South Africa's borders, the management of state sovereignty and the friction of migration follow visible patterns across the southern African region. In Botswana, anti-immigration sentiment has consistently influenced the local socio-political landscape. One line of research from the 2000s indicated that over 36,000 Zimbabwean nationals were deported from Botswana on an annual basis, while analysts note these numbers have likely reduced over time. The underlying social perceptions regarding resource strain and local wage pressures might still be active today. In Lesotho, specific anxieties regarding the presence of foreign traders have periodically surfaced. The documentary film Days of Cannibalism explores this phenomenon by tracking the intricate social and economic tensions that emerged when Chinese economic migrants settled into remote communities, altering local commerce. In Zambia, the vulnerability of migrant populations became visible in 2016. Randi shop owners bore the brunt of widespread urban rioting and coordinated looting, with over 60 foreign-owned shops targeted in Lusaka. The flashpoint behind this violence was a rapid spread of public rumors accusing successful foreign businessmen of involvement in ritual killings, forcing government intervention to restore order. Tensions have also surfaced in Mozambique, where reports compiled by Relief Web in 2007 document specific localized escalations. In the city of Nampula, a Burundian shop owner with official refugee status was attacked by a crowd that looted his business and damaged his transport vehicles over unfounded rumors of child trafficking. In that same period, state-run news agencies reported that barber stalls operated by Congolese refugees were ransacked. In the capital city of Maputo, another registered Burundian refugee was killed after he was almost fired upon following repeated lootings of his commercial store. In 2004, the Angolan government initiated moves that resulted into the expulsion of 100,000 Congolese nationals. In 2009, records show that Angola expelled roughly 18,000 citizens of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the DRC responded by forcibly ejecting over 39,000 Angola nationals from within its own borders. This cycle rose again in 2018, when human rights monitors reported that within a single month, approximately 380,000 migrants, predominantly from the DRC, exited Angola during a sweeping government operation targeting unauthorized diamond smuggling networks. Malawi has faced its own internal controversies. In early 2023, the Malawian government issued a strict ultimatum ordering all refugees and asylum seekers living in urban and rural commercial centers to vacate their homes and businesses and relocate back to Dzaleka refugee camp, which houses over 50,000 people. The state justified the move by citing rising local commercial competition and national security concerns, despite legal challenges from human rights groups. Now in East Africa, let's start with Tanzania. In 2013, the government executed a massive, highly coordinated campaign called Operation Kimbunga to clear border regions. While critics and independent observers at the time argued that the move was heavily leaned towards and targeted at Rwandan nationals due to regional political tensions, the government maintained a broader security focus. In 2023, a sweeping regulatory order anchored under the Citizenship Act was issued, which explicitly bars non-citizens from obtaining or renewing business licenses across 15 distinct small and medium-scale sectors, leading to widespread disagreement from affected entrepreneurs. In Kenya, national security priorities have directly shaped migration enforcement. In 2014, the government launched Operation Usalama Watch, aimed at weeding out unauthorized individuals and combating security threats. The operation largely affected members of the Somali community and other Horn of Africa migrants, leading to widespread urban sweeps, mass detentions, and verifications. Beyond these formal operations, there are deeper societal complexities regarding how communities view different groups. Recently, though in a different move justified as a necessary measure to protect the country's sovereignty, Uganda executed operations that rounded up and deported over 160 foreign nationals from 10 different countries who were found living within urban apartment complexes without valid work permits. Notably, the country is known globally as a leading host to over 1 million refugees and asylum seekers in the continent. This sits in contrast to a stark historical timeline that saw the military regime of Idi Amin forcibly expel tens of thousands of citizens of Asian descent. In Ghana, facing an underlying tide of domestic economic anxiety and rising unemployment, the newly elected administration enacted the Aliens Compliance Order in 1969. The decree gave undocumented immigrants a brief window to leave the country. This executive action led to the expulsion and flight of an estimated 200,000 to 500,000 individuals, predominantly Nigerian, Togolese, Malian, and Burkinabe traders. 14 years later, history repeated itself in exact reverse. In 1983, the then Nigerian government declared an immediate expulsion of all undocumented workers, giving an estimated 2 million people a 2-week ultimatum to exit Nigerian territory. Roughly half of those expelled were Ghanaian nationals, alongside hundreds of thousands from neighboring West African nations. The underlying tension remains close to the surface. As recently as 2025, localized protests erupted in the streets of Ghana, with demonstrators carrying placards declaring Nigeria must go. Accusations were made on the latter, with protesters accusing certain foreign nationals of involvement in crimes like kidnapping and illicit activities. This regional cycle of exclusion has deep roots in Côte d'Ivoire as well. Following the eruption of the civil conflict in 2002, the heightened instability forced the flight of approximately 400,000 regional migrants. Prior to this, successive political factions periodically encouraged anti-immigrant sentiment by weaponizing the concept of ivorite, a restrictive nationalist identity policy. The policy systemically classified a significant percentage of the population as foreigners if both of their parents were not born within the country. As European nations aggressively tightened their maritime borders and fund external border enforcement, Mediterranean coastline countries like Tunisia, Libya, and Algeria have essentially been transformed into involuntary containment zones for thousands of sub-Saharan African migrants who are trapped mid-journey. This systemic containment has created intense domestic friction. State officials and localized nationalist movements have increasingly deployed sharp political rhetoric that frames these stranded sub-Saharan populations not merely as economic competitors, but as a demographic threat to the identity of the region. This regional tension sits alongside long-standing, subtle cultural marginalization experienced by indigenous non-Arab populations within the zone, such as the historic Nubian and Berber communities, highlighting how deeply lines of belonging are drawn across the northern tier of the continent. And the list surely does continue across the globe. Some of these instances directly speak to the necessity of protecting state sovereignty and enforcing laws, while others may be viewed outright as xenophobia. This reality forces us to confront difficult structural questions. Which appeals to you?